Labor is going to a budget and it's looking like, I would say, a May 3 election at this point. But it is going to be sometime in May, that is for sure. So what are the trends? What are the signs when we look at Newspoll and recent election results? I want to bring in Simon Welsh now from RedBridge Group. And we haven't spoken about WA, and I really want to do that because WA is a bit of an outlier when it comes to the state result. But there are... you can't ignore the strong signals for brand Labor there. It's also, if you're Peter Dutton, you'd be a bit worried about WA, wouldn't you, Simon?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, as you say, WA is a bit of an outlier because of the size of the margins and those sorts of things that Labor took at the last election. So, everything is bigger in WA. But interestingly, within those numbers, while they're they are big and eye-watering numbers in many ways, within that, the trends are actually kind of similar to what we've seen in recent by-elections here in Victoria and other places. So, and what I mean by that is obviously big haircuts on the Labor primary vote. I think time of counting, we're looking at about 18% at the moment on the Labor primary. But off an extraordinarily high base. So I don't think we can draw any conclusions about seeing, swings of that magnitude against Labor in WA. But there will be swings against Labor, and some of those seats they hold could be imperilled. I'm thinking about sort of your Tengies and these sorts of things. So I'll talk about why that is, because there's also a problem here for the Liberals. So what we're seeing now, and we've seen this in the polling, and now we've seen it in the live, as I say, in a couple of places, which is, while Labor is losing these big double-digit votes on primary, the Libs aren't picking up enough of it. So they're picking up sort of single-figure swings to them on primary, and then enough of that vote is still finding its way back to Labor on two-party preferred. So what that means is, what we're seeing is, unless it's a seat where there's been a sort of a historical Liberal vote, their primary is sort of in the high 30s or around the 40 mark. They're just, unless it's one of those seats, they're just not picking up enough to win these seats. So the kinds of seats, part of this outer suburban strategy that the Libs have turned to in this election, those sort of traditional red wall outer suburban seats, they're too far away. And while Labor is certainly losing enough to lose these seats, but the Libs aren't picking it up. And I think that's sort of the big message out of WA. It's the big message out of places like the Werribee by-election is the Libs just can't close that gap to get sort of to where they need to be picking up 15, 16, 17 seats at this next election. They're probably stuck more back at 8, 9, 10. Still a significant gain, but obviously it's going to see us in this minority government kind of situation.
I mean, if you had one word for this next election, it'd be complicated, right? Because you've got this 47% people who are undecided at the moment, don't see where their natural home is. You have the Teals on the rise. You see what you just explained, where people are turning away from Labor, but they're not necessarily going to the coalition. So it is going to be, all the signs are, a minority at this point. Tony Barry likes to describe some of these Labor voters that are moving as perhaps Dutton curious, but they're not Dutton locked in. They're not committed. They are over also what he describes as the Labor cheese board set and being moralised to. But you also have this other dynamic there, and that is the millennials. Millennials are less tribal than baby boomers, and now they're the biggest voting bloc, about 49%. And the baby boomers have shrunk significantly just because, of age and where the millennials are at. So there's a lot playing into this election, isn't there? Women as well. It's often been said, Peter Dutton has a women issue. But do you prescribe to this idea, Simon, that it's perhaps Anthony Albanese that has a women issue because of the cost of living crisis? And I say that because traditionally, women in the outer suburbs, they're doing the grocery shopping. They're the ones that have to explain to their kids why they can't do extracurricular activity because money's tight, etc. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is the women in the focus groups who are the ones with the heartbreaking stories. The ones that talk about working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. The ones that are worried about their kids because they can't get in to see a doctor. Absolutely, there is a real sort of volatility amongst the women vote at the moment. I think amongst the male vote that has come off the Labor pile, I think they're gone. I think the degree of frustration and anger amongst those male voters will make it very difficult for them to come back. So I think we're kind of at the bottom. We're at the floor in terms of that male vote. I think what's interesting about that female vote is the volatility, but the door is still open. And the reason the door is still open is because when you're asking people in these communities to sort of vote against a historical trend, historically, these are Labor communities. They've grown up in Labor families. You're asking them to vote against that trend. You need more than just the government's a bit rubbish or even a lot rubbish. You need to give them an alternative. And I think this is the bit that's missing at the moment. Why should they trust Peter Dutton to look after their economic interests? And that's what they're interested in, their economic interests. And that's the bit that's missing. And it's not to say that Peter Dutton can't do it.
Yeah.
But they're running out of runway to make that case. But that sort of invisibility in a way of Peter Dutton on the economic front is why these voters are still in the departure lounge. They're really not happy. They would love to vote for somebody else, and probably will with their primary vote. They will probably go Greens or an independent or a minor party. But without that reason to trust Peter Dutton with their economic interests, enough of them will find their way back to Labor on preferences as things stand right now.
Absolutely fascinating, Simon. Can't wait to talk to you frequently and again next week, because it's going to be a long couple of weeks for these major parties and some of the Teals as well. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Laura.